We're joined by Andriy Sydelnykov, politician and leader of the international movement Speak Louder. Andrei, welcome to Freedom.
Yes, good evening.
Am I right in understanding that this sort of obsession Putin has with the war, which we've talked about so much, has already started to worry those who are closest to him and who also make certain decisions or carry them out?
Well, I wouldn't say it's worrying them. This started quite a while ago, but now you can see there's a whole wave going on. Basically, a diverse media campaign involving all sorts of resources and sources in order to, on the one hand, intimidate people. There's that notorious interview with the war criminal Melnyanchenko, number 8 on Forbes' list of physicists in Russia. Naturally, all of this is connected. They're all just links in the same chain. Of course, it's uncomfortable for those who control the finances. They not only have to hold on to them, but also, frankly, worry about their own future and the future of their families. And of course, when we see that Ukraine, even if it's not winning on the front lines, at the very least, the initiative is currently on the Ukrainian side. That makes Putin's inner circle pretty nervous, as well as everyone familiar with the situation and who simply understands where things are heading. That's why all sorts of information leaks, rumors, and so on are being spread.
But still, yes, based on what's actually happening, I think Putin's closest circle, the Russian elite, has excellent access to the real state of affairs. Isn't it possible that people are already whispering that our leader really doesn't understand the real situation anymore and is making completely inadequate decisions and plans for what comes next? Are they really making all these decisions? Or, on the contrary, do they support him in everything he does?
Again, it's not all the same. Some support him, some don't. People have been whispering for quite a while now. And as for the inadequacy of decision making, well, honestly, that was already noticeable during COVID and even before Russia's full scale invasion of Ukraine. So, once again, this is nothing new for the ruling elite. They've been whispering all these years, and in fact, that's how each of them has been pushing their own interests. But now the situation is different. It's starting to really get to a lot of people all at once. And honestly, as I already mentioned, it's really not that simple. Take that notorious interview with The Economist, for example, Melnichenko. And there will be more things like this coming up in the next few weeks. Various other similar things, where, as they say, things aren't as clear cut as they like to claim. So we really shouldn't count on them to overthrow Putin. And indeed, we need to keep up the pressure that the Ukrainian people are applying, that the armed forces of Ukraine are applying, and in fact, that Ukraine's allies are applying on the international stage. That's why right now is actually a really good window of opportunity, not only to record, let's say, a hypothetical defeat of the Russian Federation, but also to go on the offensive on all fronts, regardless of whether it's direct confrontation on the battlefield, and just as importantly, with sanctions and international pressure, not just against Putin's inner circle, but against Russia as a whole, against the Russian people. This is already producing and will continue to produce quite good results, but it simply needs to be intensified. Otherwise, all of this, it could turn out to be empty. The window of opportunity could simply close again, and then we'd have to wait for a new one. But today, I think there is neither the time nor the resources nor the lives of Ukrainians to spare to be able to count on some new window of opportunity. So today, we need to make the most of every opportunity to ensure that Moscow, the Kremlin, not only makes concessions, but also, in fact, commits to further steps in order for the war to end completely and for Russians to be held accountable for their crimes. Although, again, in the media space, we see that this worries them a lot, and they are trying in every possible way to avoid responsibility. Going forward,
Well, basically, yes. For war, for military affairs, this isn't really news. It's more of an obvious rule or conclusion. You need to strike at the enemy's weak points. So, what weak points do Putin and his inner circle have today?
The weak points are sanctions. The weak points are the destruction of the fuel and energy infrastructure in the Russian Federation. And that's true. Today we can see it clearly, right before our eyes, when not only, the lines for gasoline, the shortage of gasoline, but actually these are the two main sore points as I see it. These issues are having a serious impact on Putin's inner circle today. Not Moscow itself, not the Kremlin itself, not Putin himself, but at least the position of his inner circle. Again, things are no longer so clear cut for them, and they understand that. You've understood this for quite a while now. They had this understanding before, but today it's just becoming more firmly established in their minds. That's why we just need to expand. Indeed, the sanctions pressure is finally, by and large, bearing the fruit that was planted many years ago. Not just when the full scale invasion began, really, it started when the Russians essentially declared war with the annexation of Crimea. 12 years. That's why, unfortunately, all of this is developing and has developed very slowly. Today, we feel these things where we really just need to put even more pressure, be even tougher, and frankly, not give in or start thinking that the Russians will finally come to their senses. No, they won't come to their senses. In any case, direct negotiations are impossible at this point. We understand that. They're unlikely to happen this year. Nevertheless, the fewer opportunities Moscow has to maneuver, the better it will be for ensuring the victory of the civilized world over this fascist empire, and, accordingly, for the possibility of envisioning some kind of future for the territory from which this fascist onslaught is coming today.
But again, there are people in Putin's inner circle who, on the contrary, support Ukraine's intention to end the war, as President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky has said. He reminded that these very Ukrainian long range strikes have already reached several regions of Russia, as well as targets in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. And despite the Kremlin's public statements about being ready for negotiations, Russia's actual actions right now show the opposite. In Kyiv, they're convinced that the only language Moscow understands today is the language of force and systematic pressure. That's the kind of statement it is. Among other things, it raises the issue of negotiations, the negotiation process that we are all approaching but can't seem to actually reach. Right now, this topic isn't really being discussed in detail for a number of reasons. Basically, how much can we really move forward with any negotiation processes right now? And how successful could they be if there is actually someone who can influence the Kremlin from within to take a different approach? Because essentially, what we've heard before was that either Ukraine surrenders or no one talks about anything, just stalling for time. But even Trump is tired of this now, and as you've mentioned several times already, many people in Putin's inner circle have also started to realize that things can't go on like this.
Well, look, regarding possible negotiations, and I want to stress again, possible negotiations, which I personally don't believe will happen this year. Yes, there are still 6 months left until the end of the calendar year. I think several steps need to be taken by, once again, Putin's inner circle if they want to at least not just protect themselves, but somehow influence the situation and bring about some kind of change. I wouldn't really agree with the positive angle in the sense that they all just want to get themselves an indulgence. And frankly, they have no options left except to remove Putin from power one way or another. How they do that is up to them to decide. And then they need to put forward a negotiator from among the ruling elites who will sign Russia's capitulation. On what terms will this happen? Only then will there be an opportunity to negotiate. I'm afraid they're not capable of that yet. They understand this, but they're not able to take such steps, and mentally, they just can't do it. They still haven't come to terms with the fact that sooner or later, Russia will have to sign a capitulation and will have to commit to paying reparations. But again, there will be some terms. It's hard to say today, but they still don't get it. This definitely won't happen this year. And as for the future, again, I'm not some Cassandra to predict what will happen. The way out, as I see it, and as I say, is really only one for them. With a take, most likely no at this point in time. What will happen next? Well, we'll see. Putin is facing a pretty tough August, and September will be tough as well. And after that, the Kremlin will have to take some pretty unpopular measures, which, as of today, they seem to be ready for, but the situation is changing so quickly because of the arrival of those friendly birds from the armed forces of Ukraine, let's put it that way. So, accordingly, everything could actually shift quite quickly. But I repeat, to count on serious negotiations, on them not dragging things out, and on these are constructive proposals. As of today, from Moscow, I think it's absolutely impossible to count on that. We really need to set much tougher conditions than what we're even talking about right now. And we ourselves are thinking about this in order to pull back and essentially conduct a normal negotiation process. But I'll say it again, Russia is not capable of that yet. Will it become capable? This year, I'm not at all sure. And I think that all of this can only happen next year. Again, there are a lot of different factors that will influence this. That includes the legislative elections in the United States in November. It also depends on how the armed forces of Ukraine will use their means to, let's say, leave people without electricity and heat, just as the Russians did for several years in a row for Ukrainian citizens. So, if there are, let's say, successful arrivals of those good birds, then accordingly, the negotiating position will shift toward, let's say, a more normal approach to negotiations. If that doesn't happen, well, it's going to be pretty difficult. Again, we're stuck in this kind of informational and international swamp. At this point, it's really hard to say what steps could actually be taken. Once again, we need to see how events develop.
Well, yes, I just want to clarify one thing. Ukraine strikes only at military targets, legitimate ones, exclusively. And right now, from Moscow, from the Kremlin, and on international platforms, there's a constant attempt to equate the victim and the aggressor. And there are statements about this as well.
This is an entire Kremlin strategy. In reality, a huge number of agents are involved here. Public agents, both inside the country, and every single one of them signs off on it. I'm talking about public figures who speak out, let's say, on political issues, and all of them have documents signed by Russian social services. They all signed these things. I want to emphasize today there isn't a single public figure in Russia. Not a single person who is present doesn't have obligations signed with the Russian special services. Agents are involved, direct, indirect, or just well known figures. Those who are in the West among Russian citizens. But again, let me repeat, I'll go back to what I've been discussing these last few days this interview. The Economist journalist Arkady Ostrovsky, who he has also signed up, he was recruited by the Russian special services a long time ago. So it's absolutely no surprise that things like this appear in such respected publications. The tentacles, this Putinist fascist KGB octopus, have spread all over the world. Unfortunately, fighting it, even if it's possible at all, is extremely difficult because there's a huge number of these so called agents. They are spread out basically across all local spheres, economically, politically. Accordingly, a huge number of journalists are, let's say, subsidized by the Kremlin, even many of those who aren't yet involved with the Russian special services. That's why this is a big problem, but it's a problem for the future. First and foremost for European countries where Russian citizens live today and live legally. But that doesn't make the problem go away. So a huge amount of effort will still need to be made in this area as well.
Well, basically, that's part of why we're here together, to make this octopus's existence meaningless, even if we can't cut off its tentacles. In other words, to call things by their proper names, and to say that, yes, there are all kinds of situations. There are a lot of statements like that. Russia spends money on things that benefit itself, including distorting the truth. And we need to pay close attention to all of this. By the way, you mentioned this as well. August September is a kind of deadline for Russia, and I'd like to talk about this in more detail. I'll start by saying that there are indirect signs that the pressure is already starting to be felt inside Russia. These signs are appearing, and according to the latest poll by the Russian Public Opinion Research Center, Putin's approval rating is dropping, and it's been going down for the second week in a row. One of the reasons cited is precisely the consequences of Ukrainian strikes on oil refining infrastructure, which have already led to a fuel crisis and rising prices, something that ordinary people are starting to feel. And people are feeling it all across almost the entire territory of the Russian Federation at the same time. But at the same time, Moscow's official position remains unchanged. The Moscow Times, for example, writes that the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Lavrov, has once again stated that Russia does not intend to agree to any ceasefire along the front line and will continue to pursue the goals of this so called special military operation. Peskov is now openly calling it a war. So it seems like there's already some kind of disconnect here. Something has happened to him because of these events. But still, yes, September. I understand that elections, or rather pseudo elections, are supposed to take place. Let's call things by their real names. And so, given this kind of tension, how can they even take place? And how do you see the whole development of this political pre election situation in Russia in the near future?
Yes, well, again, it really doesn't matter, neither the pre election situation nor what will happen against the backdrop of the elections, because for the Kremlin, and frankly, all Russians know this perfectly well, as do people abroad, there haven't been any real elections for a very long time. It doesn't matter who votes or how they vote, what matters is who counts the votes and how. By the way, all the votes have already been counted, and the breakdown of votes for the upcoming so called State Duma elections is already sitting on Sergei Kuryenpai's desk. So everything has already been calculated. The percentage ratios can be adjusted depending on different figures. They might tweak things a little bit more, but overall, everything is perfectly clear. The Kremlin and Putin couldn't care less. First and foremost, let's say about the certain minor complaints from Russian citizens about what's ahead for them and how every day they're trying to find gasoline. People with money are managing just fine, I have to say. I know that in Moscow, under the FSB's wing, they've organized so called deliveries, gas cans for crazy amounts of money. So the gasoline itself costs as much as it does at the gas stations, but the delivery fee is enormous. And there are buyers for it. It's a completely new and excellent business they've set up. Literally, all of this has been organized just in the past month. So these people are doing just fine. As for how ordinary people are doing, they really don't care. There's no resistance from Russian citizens. As of today, as of the so called elections on September 20th, they won't take any action. So you shouldn't count on anything happening here either, but there are a huge number of so called good Russians involved inside the country and abroad too, trying to whitewash and legitimize these kinds of election cycles. We see this happening every day. Really, there's a huge network of agents at work, and massive amounts of money have been invested. So people can complain as much as they want, but in terms of politics and helping Ukraine or ending the war, they won't be able to achieve anything as of today. That's absolutely clear. Another thing is, I wouldn't put much stock in those ratings or their accuracy, because all these ratings are released under the strict control of the Russian security services and the presidential administration. So apparently, if there's a decline, it's probably beneficial for certain Kremlin factions. They'll always maneuver within this balance until, again, who knows, maybe the sword of retribution falls on the shoulders of one criminal or another.
So, am I right in understanding that no matter what public sentiment is, or the situation, or even shortages of certain goods, the elections will take place and will have the result that's needed?
It's absolutely obvious, and moreover, the vast majority of Russian citizens support what Vladimir Putin's doing. They are ready to endure various hardships, different experiences, and they absolutely do not associate, let's say, the lack of gasoline, neither with the war nor with President Putin's policies. So, once again, I want to say counting on the Russian people to come to their senses and stop killing Ukrainians is simply pointless. You need to understand that this is not going to happen. People pay taxes, and these taxes are turned into bombs that are dropped on peaceful citizens of Ukraine. So, every individual who pays taxes today is involved in this, into the Russian budget. And to say that Russian citizens are supposedly protesting against this war more and more every month is simply a lie spread by Kremlin agents.
You said Russian citizens. For us, that's a pretty familiar term. We all understand what it means. But I had an interesting thought, that in ancient Greece, the word citizen actually meant a free person. In that sense,
So,
how correct is it to call them citizens now?
well, listen, we're on the air right now. Of course, I can say what I really think. I don't think the viewers would like it, though. People really don't like it when you call things by their real names. But what can you do? Yeah, there are some familiar phrases we use. It's clear that Russian citizens today are simply unable to reflect on their own actions, let alone the actions of the Russian authorities. Their brains have just been atrophied by propaganda, decades and years of it. And actually, based on what I have personally gathered from sources inside Russia, it is quite clear that, of course, they do not at all approve of the ongoing attacks on the oil refineries. So, in their hatred, they don't curse the government, not Putin, not the Russian officials. These criminals who are in power in every region, they curse Ukrainian citizens instead. That's how propaganda works. That's what they've been hammered into their heads for so many, many years. Their brains have atrophied from this amount, let's say, of the population. If you prefer the word citizens, well, I'll gently call them the population too.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I like that word, but it's not really about whether I like it or not. It's just a bit of a philosophical reflection. We've gotten a bit sidetracked, but let's get back to specifics. And the specifics are that Russia is once again tightening control over the internet and restricting the use of foreign SIM cards. Now, even roaming tariffs are subject to exactly the same filtering as those of Russian operators. Previously, connecting through a foreign operator allowed you to bypass some of the restrictions imposed by Roskomnadzor, but now that option will no longer be available. But right now, there are about 2 million of these cards in Russia, of which around 500,000 are used regularly, mainly to access the internet. However, the Russian Ministry of Digital Development, of course, explained all this by saying that the restrictions are supposedly necessary to counteract all foreign SIM cards and Ukrainian drones. But once again, we see who is being blamed. Again, everything is being blamed on Ukrainian drones. But overall, these restrictions are clearly connected, obviously, to the fact that, as I understand it, for the regime, it's unsafe to allow any information to be obtained using such SIM cards.
On the one hand, yes, but both the Kremlin and others understand perfectly well that only a very small percentage of the population in the Russian Federation seeks out information using the internet. Actually, in reality, again, the Russian people should, for now, be thankful that Putin hasn't shut down the internet completely, as has long been planned. The technical capability to do this already exists. Last year was all about setting this up. This Chinese equipment, following the Chinese model of internet access. So technically, Russia is prepared. But on the other hand, there are still certain circles for whom, let's put it this way, it's a business, and for whom, basically, the loss of free internet access for citizens, again, we weren't bothered by it ourselves. So, actually, I'll think about how to call this differently in a more, let's say, elegant way in the future. So, it all depends on the finances. It's huge amounts of money, IT, and everything else. This really is a huge business that feeds Russian criminals. And the money transfers go not only, of course, to the budget, it's a major component of corruption. So we'll see what happens here. People are always thinking and waiting for the day when the fridge will beat the TV. And here, basically, it makes sense because for the authorities, it really would be great to shut all these things down so that, let's say, the forces, those who monitor order on the internet, could be reassigned to other areas. And honestly, there are already enough people out on the streets, as we can clearly see. But just imagine if these people are freed up, what an army of idle hands that would be. How they could fill new units of the Russian armed forces with Russian conscripts. So, a lot of things are interconnected here. So, for now, they should be grateful. Exit visas are already being discussed. If before, say, 10 years ago, when this kind of information first started to appear and it was compared to Soviet times, it all seemed like a joke, today it's no laughing matter. This is really being discussed behind the scenes in the government, and it's not far off at all.
So, where's the line after which all of this could actually be implemented?
That's actually a good question. I don't have an answer to it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I really don't have an answer. Because as for the internet, like I said, by the end of last year, everything was ready to implement it. And accordingly, today there is the possibility to do so, but the authorities haven't implemented it yet. Let's see how the results turn out, how the so called elections to the State Duma will be summed up, after which mobilization is supposed to begin. So a lot depends on how that goes as well. Up to now, the authorities, of course, not just hesitate, but are actually afraid of mobilization, but they have no other choice. Well, once again, there are just too many factors influencing the implementation of certain, let's say, processes that are being discussed in society, in the media, and abroad. Basically, if Putin goes with this scenario of opening a second front, against the Baltic countries, then let's put it this way, these processes will be put into action instantly.
Well, Andre, we literally have just a minute left, but let's try to sum up our conversation. Is it still worth expecting any changes from within the top leadership of the Russian Federation?
From the top leadership specifically, because as I said, there's no point in expecting changes from the bottom. The top leadership, well, once again, it can be considered as one of the possible scenarios, as one of the options, but for now, I don't see any prerequisites for something to happen, like bluntly speaking, someone taking a crowbar and hitting Putin over the head. No, there are no such prerequisites today. It's not worth hoping for that either, just so you don't fool yourself. I think we just need once again to distance ourselves from this question and keep going. To keep up this tough approach, this hard line on the front line with strikes on military targets and accordingly with sanctions and diplomatic pressure. If there are certain successes on all fronts, then that notorious day X will get closer when Russian circles, the so called Russian elite, might start taking some steps. Today, there's no need to expect anything from them. We see that everything is orchestrated, all of it is under the control of the Russian security services and the presidential administration. No matter who you are in the lineup of billionaires in this so called Forbes list, everything is under control from start to finish. There isn't a single person. As of today, among the richest people in Russia, who isn't under control? So it's important to understand and take this into account.
Well, then, we'll keep an eye on this.